We are going to wait a few more minutes to wait for other colleagues to join. So we thank you for your patience. Maybe wait one more minute to see if more people log on, and if not, we'll get started so as to not delay the program. Very good. So I guess we'll get started. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to this first ever mid-year meeting of the Washington Group on Disability Statistics. My name is Heidi Ullman, and I am the newest team member to the Washington Group Secretariat. I joined the Secretariat last year just after the annual meeting, and I look forward to working with all of you and to get to meet you in person in a not too distant future. Before handing over to Jennifer, I just wanted to make a few housekeeping announcements. The first is that we would be very grateful if you could keep your microphone muted for the duration of the meeting. If you have a comment to make, we encourage you to make it in the chat box, which we'll be checking throughout the meeting. Also, the final session, we do hope to have it be more dynamic. And so for that particular session, we also encourage you to raise your hand, and you do so by clicking on the reactions icon, and there you'll see a little hand, and we'll try to call on you as you raise your hand, but this is a smaller group, so we think that that definitely will be more manageable. Another point is that this session is being recorded, and that recording will be made available on the Washington Group website, along with all the presentations that are made this afternoon. Without further delay, then I pass the word on to Jennifer, who will be giving us some opening remarks and also an update of the work of the Washington Group Secretariat. Jennifer, the floor is yours. Jennifer, you are on mute.
Sorry. Welcome, everyone. It is nice to have this first virtual meeting of a mid-year meeting of the Washington Group on Disability Statistics. This is part 2 of that meeting. We had an earlier session this morning, DC time. And as you know, when we have done these virtual meetings, we've tried to do them in 2 sections so that no one has to stay awake or attend in the middle of the night. And when we get to the end of this, we really do want to raise the issue of whether this is the best way to do this or there's another way of doing it. One of the reasons of having this mid-year meeting came out of our annual meeting last year, that we would be able to take fuller advantage of virtual communication that had been kind of forced on us because of COVID. So while we weren't able to meet in person, we were trying to do a little bit more with virtual platforms. And this is one example of being able to do that, having a mid-year meeting, and also trying to have some more topic-specific webinars throughout the year. But we do think it's a good time to rethink and at the end, maybe come up with some ideas about how to do this better. So actually, can I have the next slide, please? So I'm just going to do a little opening remarks and some updates. And, as has been our way of operating actually since the beginning, when we end an annual meeting, we always put forth some agreements about what might happen moving forward and what we want to accomplish in the year. So I thought I would just give you a real quick rundown of some of those agreements we made last year and where we are on them. And you'll hear about all of these in some way or another over the next couple of hours as we go through the program. So there was an agreement to finalize the analytic guidance documents that primarily Mitch Loeb had developed, particularly the severity indicator and document-specific indicator documents. And those have been finalized and that's been accomplished, as has the development of syntax in a range of the analytic software platforms, and you'll hear about that. So check those two off, they're done. Now, some things are ongoing and we expected them to be. One is to continue refining and making perfect our new website in terms of accessibility and user friendliness and what's on there. And I can say that we've gotten a lot of really good feedback about the website. It seems it's clearly easier to use than the old site. People can find things, and we've gotten really positive feedback about the look and feel and how it's structured. But there are still errors in it, and there's still things that could be done much better. And there are some broken links or some things that go to odd places that we didn't intend them to go to. So we really do encourage you to continue looking at the website and letting us know when you see things that can be improved upon. And if you have colleagues or you yourself can look at it from an accessibility point of view among persons with disabilities, that would also be very helpful. We have tried to do that using other contexts, but it is something that I'm sure can be improved upon. And again, this is ongoing and will probably be ongoing forever. But a big chunk of it was done this year. One of the major activities was in trying to develop some kind of standard templates for reports so that we could put more analytic products on the website using the tools. And when this was presented at the annual meeting, the issue of whether or not one should age adjust some of these estimates came up. So the technical presentation at today's meeting will be on age adjustment, and it is meant as the start of a process, just kind of laying the groundwork, some of the background. We originally thought we might do this as a webinar, but thought it would work well for this mid-year meeting. Hopefully, and you'll hear this again, we would like people to volunteer to be on a short-term work group that would then go ahead and develop best practices on this. You will hear updates on the work group activities that have taken place in the months since our annual meeting, and also what's been happening with the regional disability statistics groups, and trying to move those forward and kind of getting them on the website and so they can share some of their documentation, and you'll hear that. And then, also related to trying to get some reports out using a standard template. We're still waiting for volunteer countries that are willing to replicate some of the analyses so that we can put some of that on. We get a lot of requests for data, and it would be nice to be able to show and highlight the use of the tools and how they can best be used. So that's where we've come since the last meeting, and we'll hear more about it. Next, please. So we set out in consultation with the steering committee and jointly with the Secretariat some objectives for this mid-year meeting. Obviously to share these updates since the 20th annual meeting, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. In order to advance the discussion about this dissemination of our products, we are going to have a technical session on age adjustment, and again to lay the groundwork for some future work, and then sharing the updates and the work plans. And then the last 30 minutes are an open discussion about plans in the format for the 21st annual meeting, which will be next fall. We're really looking for a lot of input and interaction in developing the agenda and the format for that meeting. So next one, please. So first I want to update you on some of the activities of the steering committee. So after the suggestion was made to hold a mid-year meeting, this steering committee endorsed that suggestion and worked with the secretariat to identify a time and an agenda for the meeting that we're having now. The decision was also made to hold a 2021 meeting virtually rather than in person. This was a difficult decision, but there's a lot of startup time for running an annual meeting. And at the time we would have had to make the decision to hold it in person. Things were still quite unstable. They are getting better, but they're still not quite stable yet enough. So I think the decision was the correct one to do something virtually in 2021. Now, our lovely colleagues at the Kenyan National Bureau of Statistics are continuing to agree to support the next and host the next in-person meeting. And we are leaving open the option of having that meeting in spring of 2022 and not waiting until the fall. If the situation should be appropriate, we'll try to do that. It's been a long time since we've had it feels like it's been a very long time since we've seen each other. Now, the governance document was written a long time ago and really hasn't been updated, and certain things have happened that the Secretariat thought that we really needed to provide some updates to the governance document. I think you've all received the updated document. There were not huge changes, but when we wrote that document to begin with, there were no regional groups. So they are never mentioned in the document. So they are now added to the document. And in the leaders of the regional group have been added to the steering committee. We also added the option of having a vice chair position for the group in the steering committee. And as you recall, the steering committee membership has always been the past, current, and future hosts of the in-person meeting, the work group chairs, and area representatives, so regional area representatives. And those were on a rotating basis. Now that we've added the regional group chairs to the steering committee, there are many ways an individual or country could be a member of the steering committee. And a decision was made that when possible, we would want different people to serve on the committee in these roles. So someone might be a chair of a work group, but also the chair of the regional group. We would want them to serve in one role, and then the other, have someone else from the other group serve in the other role. And that way we can get more people involved in the steering committee. And then finally, I want to welcome our new regional member. This is a representative from the Asian Pacific region, and it's Riaza Fathimath. I hope I got that right. And so we now have a complete steering committee, and they're raring to go. So that is good news. Next slide, please. Now some updates from the Secretariat. I want to first talk about some staffing changes. So you've already met Heidi Ullman, who joined us last year and has kind of hit the ground running. She has great background in the area of disability statistics and has been a great asset to the group. She is also going to be serving as the point person for all the regional groups. That's a role that Mitch had for a long time and has passed it on to her. So the regional groups will use her as kind of the point of contact. Now, Cordell is with us today, but in fact, he is not with the Secretariat full time anymore. He has kind of gone back to learn a lot about data science. So he is in school part of the year. We happen to be lucky that he is on break this week. So he is back with us. And as I say, I think we're going to just schedule all our meetings when he's on break. We really do miss not having him around all the time, but looking forward to his return when his studies are finished. And I was joking with him this morning that he will have to give a webinar at that time about data science and disability statistics. So we will definitely take full advantage of all that he is learning. As you know that when Mitch retired from NCHS and a year or so ago, but still remains active. And actually, I have done something similar. I left my position at NCHS last December and I'm doing some other things, mostly related to disability statistics. So I have offered to stay on as chair for as long as that is useful. And that's also why we now will have a vice chair, but I'm happy to do it, and it's a labor of love. So, but we'll see how this goes. But I am certainly happy to have the role and to continue working very closely with the Secretariat. Now, the sad news, as you know, is that the grant that we had from DFAT in Australia came to an end in 2020 and was not renewed. We had put in a proposal that that wasn't funded, and we did not put in another proposal this year, given that what we understood was happening with the at DFAT. Although we are changing tactics a little bit. You might hear from that about that in terms of how we're trying to get support for the group. The biggest, I think, impact of not having the DFAT support is in the fact that we don't have interpretation for the meetings. So certainly not a lot of the money, but a good portion of the money that we had to support the Washington group did go towards having interpretation at the meetings and translating of documents. In addition, there was the website redesign and a whole lot of administrative support from UCL, and we were able to kind of hire some consultants when we had to. So that is certainly missed. And we are trying again to find ways to fill that gap. And we were very, very fortunate to be actually got a call from the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany, BMZ, who were interested in supporting the work of the group and supporting disability statistics, particularly in terms of our two regional groups in Africa, the Brazzaville group and the South and East Africa group. And while we have not exactly finalized the paperwork, they were very generous in allowing us to announce the fact that we're moving in that direction. This will be approximately a 6-month plan of activity, again, administered by UCL. It's certainly much smaller, but really just focusing on the kind of support that the regional groups need to get going. We're very happy to have that and are looking at it as possibly a model for getting other funding sources to support other of the regional groups, kind to go to organizations that we know have a particular interest in that region. And still maybe trying to get support for the group overall, since I do think that helps and certainly helps getting people, when we do meet in person, back to meeting together in terms of travel support and support for hotels and things like that. Next, please. Now, the next couple of slides have long lists on them, and I'm not going to go over them in the interest of time. But what we wanted to show is kind of the activities that are going on, and I think a lot of them have intensified because of this more people interacting virtually during the past year or so. So this first slide gives a list of some of the meetings that the Secretariat has been involved in. And really, these are not meetings, they're really phone calls, whether they're Zoom calls or telephone calls. A lot of requests come in through the Washington group mailbox. And the Secretariat has always tried to answer those very quickly. Sometimes it's a question we can easily answer a lot, especially with the new website. We can just direct people to the website, give them the link, and we're done. Sometimes it's a phone call just to find out exactly what somebody wants and trying to point them in the right direction, have some conversation. Sometimes it's a longer term project. As I said, this is how the funding from BMZ came about, was through a request in the website. What I think is interesting when we look at this list, some of them are, kind of partners that we've been working with for a long time and obvious partners, but we've been getting requests from partners that we hadn't thought of as potential partners. And I think it was yesterday or the day before, we had a nice conversation with the American Bar Association Rule of Law Initiative group, who are interested in disability statistics in the Middle East. And wanted some advice and what could the group do for them in terms of training and other things. And also the National Democratic Institute, which is a NGO, nonpartisan organization that supports democratic institutions throughout the world, is interested in disability and interested in disability statistics. So it's nice to have these new partners, but it's also interesting when you find out, how did these people find us? So word is getting out, and there seems to be this very interesting network of who talks to whom, because when we get on the calls with these people, they'll tell us, oh, our network in X told us to call you because you would know about this. So it's getting out, and it's getting out in a broad way that we had not anticipated. So I think that was quite interesting, and I think really very, we should take some credit the fact that the work is being recognized in such a wide variety of places. Next, please. Anytime a country or a regional group asks for some kind of technical assistance to review a document or something like that, happy to do that. And then there's also the conferences and seminars and workshops that somebody will participate in. Sometimes it's just going to it. We went to the session of the UN Statistical Commission this year, kind of said, we are here, even though we weren't on the agenda. Conference of State Parties, same thing, although sometimes there are side events that there will be some participation in. Sometimes just asked to be part of something because they want a Washington Group person there to answer questions. So there are a variety of these things that come up, that we're happy to represent the organization. And if there is something that comes up that seems to be more appropriate for a member or another partner, we pass those requests on. But again, still, this is just in the time since the annual meeting. There is a fair amount of activity that does relate to our work. Next, please. And just wanted to show the number of requests we get for translation of documents, information on what translations we have or the actual translation of the tools. And these are primarily the questionnaires. The website, when it was redesigned looking at how to make this more accessible to users. So the ones that we have official quote unquote translations of are on the website, ones where there has been a translation, but we have not been able to vet it. We ask people to contact us, but there's now a listing of the languages where we have potential translations. And as we provide those translations with the understanding that they have not been vetted, we don't know if these are actually accurate translations. We ask those folks to kind of get back to us if they use them, if they change them, if they evaluate them, so that we can kind of create a more comprehensive group of translations, both for the short set, the extended set, and for the child functioning module. And I think there's some translations of some of the other tool sets as well. So the translations that were done into the UN languages were all funded by DFAT. And the others were kind of trying to get as much translated as possible and using kind of in-kind work. Next one, thank you. So again, just quickly recap our agenda. Today is this opening session, then we'll have a 45-minute session on age adjustment. And then you'll get work group updates. Now, some of the work group chairs are not at this second session, so someone on the secretariat will be summarizing what they said, and the same is true for the updates from the regional chairs if they are not here. And then we'll have the open discussion about the plans for the 2021 annual meeting. So I think that's the end of this opening session. I'm just going to see if there's any comments in the chat, or anybody wants to ask a question about anything that's been presented. We have a minute or so we can address those.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Julie Weeks. Hello. Jennifer, there are no comments quite yet in the chat.
Okay, great. So we'll move on to this session on age adjustment. And I want to apologize to those of you where this is going to be kind of very routine and too basic, but we thought because this was kind of the beginning of the conversation, and it did come up at the annual meeting, and different people have different understanding and interactions with age adjustment, that we try to set kind of start all in the same place. So we're going to start really at very basic. And then at the end, kind of like, where do we stand and what do we do next to try to answer this question? So next one, please. So this question to age adjust or not to age adjust is certainly not one that is unique to us and to our consideration of our products. I worked at a national statistical office for many decades, and we were arguing about it on the first day that I worked there, and we were arguing about it on the last day that I worked there, whether a particular product should be age adjusted and how. And so this is not a one-off kind of answer. It is constantly changing and is very contextual. And I think that's probably the biggest take-home message is you have to know why you're asking the question in order to get a good answer. Next slide. So just a little bit of refresher when we when Julie introduced this template for a very short report that countries could do, one of the figures was the age-specific rates, but there was also a figure that showed prevalence rates, just overall prevalence, I think, by domain. And a question came up whether those should be age-adjusted or we should be showing what we call crude rates. And so we decided this session again to provide the background information to determine what we should do, not only for this report, but kind of generalizing from these kinds of reports to other kinds of documents that we might want to develop and put on the website. And again, what we'd like to have, and I'm going to repeat this again because I want people to get back to us and volunteer, is to constitute a small group to develop best practices in this area and either present that at the annual meeting in the fall, or if not, at a special webinar on the topic. So we really would like to come to some conclusion about how to move forward on these templates. So next. So I want to just kind of go back and talk a little bit about what is a rate. And here I'm using rate, percent, and proportion pretty much interchangeably. There is technically a difference in what a rate is, but I think in practice they tend to be used in a more vernacular. And when you ask somebody what is the prevalence rate of something, it's a very simple thought and calculation. You take the number of cases in the population that have this characteristic that you want the prevalence on, and you divide it by the total number of cases, and simple arithmetic, and you're done. But you can also think of that as a decomposing number. You can decompose how you do that, and it's much more complicated to do, but it gets you the same way. So if you think that any population can be divided into its component parts along some dimension. So if the dimension is age, you can divide the population into some categories of age, into age groups. The rate then becomes the sum of those component-specific rates multiplied by the distribution of the population by that component. And so on the slide here, you see kind of an example of that, what that would look like, where we have a set of component rates. These are rates, component-specific rates. And then we have the distribution of the population by that component. And in this case, we're getting both of these from the same data set. So I have the rate for component 1, I multiply it by the proportion of the population in component 1, rate for component 2, proportion of the population for component 2, rate for component n, all the way down. And when you get done, you add them all up and you get the same rate that you would have gotten if you just done the simple division. So, this is only important if you want to think about, well, what does it mean to age adjust or component adjust? Because you can do this on any component. Next slide, please. So you can think of a crude rate as when you do this decomposition and recomposition of the sum of these component rates multiplied by the distribution, where you're taking that distribution from the same population that you get the rates. If you do that, you will get that crude rate, the rate that you would have gotten if you just did the simple division. But it can be thought of as the sum of these multiplied products. When you use an adjusted or a standardized rate, you're taking that population distribution from a different population, not the same population. And it can be any population. It can be another country's population, another part of a subgroup of your population. It can be the world's population. It doesn't have to be a real population. It's just some distribution of population across those components. And one of the things that you will need to figure out if you want to do some kind of an adjustment is which population to use or which standard to use. Next slide. So why would you use an adjusted or a standardized rate and not just go the simple way and use the crude rate? And I think it's important first to really emphasize that adjusted rates are not real, in that they do not reflect the actual situation in the population. The crude rate does that, because the adjusted rate is a function of the specific age distribution that you used. When you do those multiplications, you are giving different weights to different of the components, and depending on the nature of the population you're using, you will change that final number in magnitude. The actual magnitude of the adjusted rate is really not meaningful in a real sense. So adjusted rates tend to be used for comparisons. You rarely see an adjusted rate all by itself. It is not very meaningful. You might look at adjusted rates when you want to do comparisons in the same population across time, or you want to do different subgroups within the same population, for example, compare men and women, or you want to compare different populations, for example, across countries. So when you would use the adjusted rate is when the comparisons that you're making, whether they're across time, whether they're across subgroup or across total populations themselves, when those that comparison should not be affected by the underlying composition of the population. In other words, you don't want that comparison to be affected by the age distribution. You're not interested in the age distribution. You would use an age-adjusted rate there. And you also want to use an age-adjusted rate when you really want a summary indicator rather than looking at the component-specific rates. You can always look at them, but there tend to be lots of them. And so you want to have some way of summarizing over all those rates. You might want to use an age-adjusted rate. There are some technical times when you wouldn't age adjust, even if you did want to do comparisons, and generally that's when the relationship with age varies across populations. So in one it goes up with age and the other it goes down with age. And then if you do an adjustment, you're kind of combining those things, and it's very hard to interpret. So next slide, please. So if we want to use an adjusted rate when we're doing comparisons where the composition is not of interest, when is that? That seems to be the most important question that we'll have to answer in our own context. Most demographic and health-related characteristics do vary by age. So age is the most common thing that you can adjust by, but it is certainly not the only thing you can adjust by. You can certainly look at, do adjustments for other things. But if you are going to age adjust, the decision about whether to use crude or age adjusted is going to be a function of the intended use of the estimate. And the same data can be used for very different objectives. So you might have the same data set and sometimes you adjust and sometimes you don't. It's all a function of those objectives. So I have two examples here that we're going to kind of talk about just briefly. The first example, I have a bunch of planners who come and they want an estimate of the number of people with vision, or the percent of the population with vision difficulties in urban and rural areas, to determine the need for services. Right? Their interest is in providing services, and they want to know in these two areas, what's the percent of the population that has these vision difficulties. In the second example, I have researchers. They want estimates of vision difficulties in urban and rural areas, but their concern is not providing services to the people who need it. Their interest is to see if exposure in a given area, has where there are irritants, is related to those vision difficulties. So Maybe urban areas have a particular kind of irritant. That irritant causes vision difficulties. They want to compare whether the risk for vision difficulties varies by urban rural because of the irritant. Next, please. So we know that vision difficulties are related to age, and we know that the population in the rural area is older. And I'm just assuming that. I'm not saying that that's true, other than we know age is related to the vision is related to age, but may not be in a particular place that the rural area is older, but let's just assume it is. So in example 1 is really asking about an estimate of burden, and that burden is given by the crude rate. How much difficulty is there, and that translates into services. The fact that the population is older in rural areas translates into greater burden and greater need for services. And so I really want to know the crude rate, because the fact that those people are older and are at higher risk, that's important. I need to know that. In example 2, though, we're really talking about risk in a different way, and it is given by the adjusted rate. So the hypothesis that the risk of vision difficulties related to irritants in urban areas, where we would tend to see higher rates if it's true, but we might see higher rates in rural areas only because the population is older. So in this example, the fact that it's older in the rural area really doesn't affect, and we don't want it to affect, the comparison of risk due to the irritant. We really want to identify and isolate the impact of the irritant, kind of irrespective of the age distribution. And the age-adjusted rate does that, so that when you look at the difference between urban and rural, you're focusing in on the risk of having the difficulty that is, in a sense, independent of the age distribution in those areas. And you still have to pick the standard. You still have to figure out how many age groups you're going to use. Those are all secondary questions, but first you want to figure out whether it is the crude or the age-adjusted rate that you want to look at. Next, please. Okay, so now we're going to just go through some examples of what is the impact of age adjustment, on disability prevalence, and what would be the result if you stuck with crude rates versus age-adjusted rates, and in terms of how that data would be interpreted and used by a variety of people in your countries. So we have an example. This is just for illustration. There are 3 countries. Country A has data for 5 and over and 18 and over. Country B has data for 18 and over, and country C has data for 5 and over and 18 and over. We don't really need to have all these examples. Just wanted to show you a variety of different ways of looking at this. All of these countries have different underlying age structures, again, for illustrative purpose, and we're just kind of assuming we're getting all of the data from the census. I'm also assuming that the data collection in all these countries is comparable, so that the same questions are asked, they were using the same methodology, that when I actually get these rates out, it is not a function of different data collection methods. The data collection methods are all the same. So we kind of have 4 steps here. First, we're going to calculate the crude rates in the normal way. Then we're going to calculate the age-specific rates, which the age-specific rates are crude rates within each age group. Then we're going to calculate the age-adjusted rates, and as our standard, our weighting factor, that's the standard, we're going to use the age distributions of the other countries. So country A, that their prevalence will be standardized to the age distribution of B and C. And you can think of country A age standardized to its own distribution. It's the crude rate, but it's also an adjusted rate to its own distribution. And then we're going to compare what effect it has, both on, if you compare the crude to the age adjusted, but also if you compare all the crudes and then compare all the age adjusted based on the different standards. And would you draw different conclusions about disability prevalence in these countries? Next slide. So the data in the tables are just there for you to have later, because we're going to show figures of all of these. But the first thing again is the crude rates. So I have 2 rates for the 5 and over for country A and C, and you can see they're very different, 1.8 and 8.1. And for A, B, and C, I have rates for 18 and over and two of them are similar. B and C are around 9 and A is 2.4. Next slide. Right, now I'm going to calculate my crude age-specific rates. These are crude within each age group, and you can see the age groups we're using. We're starting with 5 to 17 and ending is around 10-year age groups, and then we're ending in 80 and over. And you can see by looking at the age-specific rates that country A has lower rates in all of the age groups, although slightly more similar to country C in the older age groups. Country B has somewhat lower age-specific rates in the younger ages, but higher in the older age than country C. So we have different patterns of age specific rates in these three countries. Next, please. Okay, now we have the age distributions of the three countries. You can see country A is much, much younger. Country B is a little bit older, but country C is quite a bit older. It's almost getting to be a rectangular distribution where the others, especially A, is much more bottom heavy in the younger age groups. So you can see if you're using country C as your standard, you're giving a lot more weight to the older age groups. More of the population is in the older age groups, and you're multiplying by that percent than you are in some of the other age groups. Okay. Next, please. So this is just a calculation. The first column there for the 5 and over just gives country A's age-specific rates. And then you see country A's age-specific rates multiplied by country C's age distribution. Remember, that was the oldest age distribution. So if you add that all up, you'll get the age-adjusted rate for country A. For 5 and over, and then for country C, it goes the other way. The first column gives you their age-specific rate. The second column gives you that product of the age-specific rate times the age distribution. Then if you add them up, you get the country C's age-adjusted rate using country A's population. Next slide, please. And then this just shows you the exact same thing for the 18 and over, but now we have three countries, so it gets a little more complicated. You have country A age-specific rates, and then you have the multiplication of those rates times the age distribution of country B, and then next to it, the age distribution of country C. Then we have the age-specific rates for B, and then the multiplications using country A's age distribution, country C's age distribution, and then the same for country C. And you can see they're color-coded, and I'll explain that in just a second. Next, please. And then these are just what happens when you do all of the adding up, and we'll see these on some slides. So I'm not going to go over this table, but it's good to have it. Next one. Okay, so here are the legends. Now we spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out how to make this easier to see on a figure, and I think we were kind of successful, maybe not completely successful. And this is what you need to keep in mind when you're looking at the slides. So the countries are assigned colors. A is blue, B is orange, C is green. If you see a solid colored bar, okay, like the 1.8 bar for country A, okay, that means it's the crude rate. We use the age distribution of that country to calculate the rate. If you see a bar that has diagonal lines in it, the color of the lines tells you the country. So in this case, you see the lines are blue, so this is country A. But rather than use country A's age distribution here, we're using the green country's age distribution, and the green country is C. So you can see there's an outline, that bar is outlined in the color of the country whose age distribution we're using. And then if you kind of flip to the other side, you get a solid bar for the green country, that's C, so it's the crude rate. Then you have the age-adjusted rate for C, but using country A, the blue country, age distribution. Okay, so that's how all of the next set of slides are gonna look. Diagonal means it's an age-adjusted rate, the color gives you the country, and the outline color tells you which age distribution. So here we are back with our crude rates. So for 5 and over, we only have two countries, A and C. And as we saw before, the rate in C is much higher than in A. When we look at the 18 and over, now we have 3 countries. These are the crude rates. Again, B and C are similar, much higher than A. Next, please. Okay, so what happens when you age adjust the rate? So if we take country A, okay, this is the blue country. So the first 2 bars are just all about country A. You get the 1.8 for the crude rate. When you use country C's, the green countries, age distribution, you can see that rate doubles, more than doubles. Because remember, country C was a much older country. When I take country C's crude rate, the 8.1, and I age adjust it using country A's age distribution, which again was the youngest age distribution, you can see it goes down, not quite by half, but it goes down. Right, so that's the effect for the 5 and over of doing the age adjustment, where we only have the 2 countries. It's a little simpler. The next slide shows what happens for the 18 and over, where we have more countries. So again, I have country A. When you use the age composition of the orange country, country B, it goes up, but not as much as when you use the age distribution of country C. And remember, country C, the green country, had a much higher age distribution. It was much older. So when you use that age distribution, the age adjusted rate goes up more than if you use an age distribution from a country that's older, but not much older. And you can see the same kind of changes for country B. When you use country A's age distribution, blue, it goes down. When you use the older country's age distribution, that's the green one, C, it goes up. So you have a big difference for country A depending on which age distribution you're going to use to adjust it. And the same for C. It's the oldest country, so whichever other age distribution you use, it's going to bring the age adjusted rate down. It goes 5.8 if you use A and 7.2 if you use B. Okay, next slide. So what does this mean for when we want to do comparisons? The whole reason of doing this was not to compare within a country when you age adjust, but to pair across countries. So the first 2 bars on this slide, if I only had the crude rate, I would say the difference between A and C is huge. You know, it goes from like 2 to 8. But if I age adjust that the country C's, the green country, using country A's distribution, it's still higher, but nowhere near as much higher. So I would start out saying there's a huge difference in these rates, but if I use the age adjusted using the country A distribution, I would say the difference is much less because the estimate for country C is coming down. If I use country C's age distribution, the crude rate stays the same, older countries. So the rate for country A, the blue country, goes up from 1.8 to 4.3. Right? So again, country C still has a higher rate, but not as much higher than when I started out. Now it's about twice as higher, whereas before it was 4 times as high. Okay, so it changes what you say about the comparison across these countries because I've taken out the effect of the age distribution. Next, please. Now, when we look at 18 and over, it gets a little more complicated because there are 3, but we start out the same way. We have the 3 crude rates. We say 2 are the same, 1 is different. If we now use country A's age distribution, you know, country A stays the same. And actually the 2, B and C, are still kind of similar. Country B is a little higher, more higher than it had been before, using the crude rates than country C. But they're still both higher than A. It's just there's slight difference in which one is higher. And of course, they're both much lower. If we use country B's age distribution, of course, it stays the same. The rate for country A, the blue country, comes up a little bit. The rate for country C, the green country, comes down a little bit. And you see even more of a difference between B and C, and B is higher now. And then if you use country C's age distribution, this is the oldest country, it stays the same. If you use that one, if you use the country C distribution for country A, it's going from 2.4 to 5. Remember, it's going up. But now country B is 12.4. It's much higher than country C. Whereas before they're around the same, now country B is higher. And why is that? Remember, we mentioned that in the older age groups, the age-specific rates for country B were higher than country C. And when we use country C's age distribution, it's so much older. We're giving more weight to those older ages, and that's pushing country B's age distribution, age-adjusted rate higher. So you would say very different things, or maybe not, somewhat different things if you looked at the crude rate, if you looked at the age-adjusted rate using country A's, age-adjusted rate using country B, or age-adjusted rate using country C's age distribution. So the adjustment makes a difference, and the choice of the standard makes a difference. And you not only have to decide whether to adjust, you also have to decide what standard to use, because it will again affect that absolute number. That 12.4 is very different than the 9.1. It is not meaningful in the same way that 9.1 is meaningful. Okay, next slide. So just to briefly summarize, the countries have very different age distributions. A is young, B is a little older, C is the oldest. They have different age-specific rates, and there is an effective age adjustment, and it depends on which age distribution you use. And because of that, your comparison across country will change depending on which age standard is used. Next slide. So what do we want to do moving forward? So one question is, should Washington Group products that include prevalence estimates from more than one country, whether it's on a table, one table, or in these like same templates, should they present crude or age-adjusted rates? Should they include both, or will that be too complicated? Especially if you're looking at a variety of prevalences, for example, for all domains. Or should we always use age-specific rates, even though that will make the reports much, much, much longer? And then if adjustment is used, which age composition standard should be used? So one of the things, and if we have some time, we can talk about today, what are your thoughts about this? Do we have consensus on these topics? You can raise your hand, or you can put something in the chat. There were some alternatives offered this morning about doing something similar to how the global fertility rate is done. And we're certainly open to other options. But no matter what we decide or not decide today, we need volunteers to form this group to come together to determine best practices recommendations. And that could be, we will age adjust in these situations, we won't age adjust, this is why we're not age adjusting, because it comes up all the time. If we do age adjust, we'll use these standards. If we do another method, we'll use this other method. Again, a time limited group. We'd like the recommendations to be presented at the fall meeting, and if that's not possible, at a special webinar, and I'm asking for volunteers. So I am opening the floor up now for any raise your hand. It's just probably a small enough group, we can just chat about it, or if you'd like to put things in the chat box, that's fine too.
Thank you, Jennifer. There is nothing in the chat at the moment, but this is a small group. So any initial thoughts or questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and give us some feedback. Have we totally
confused everybody? I'm
confused
sorry.
you, bored you? Is there anyone who, has suggestions in terms of best practices in this area? And are you producing statistics that are either, only the crude prevalence rates or age adjusted?
So Julie, there's one comment.
Yeah, I see it. Thank you. Claire, would you like to pose your question out loud? I'll go ahead and read it. But Claire says, I'm interested in any advice around disabled versus non-disabled age adjustment. And Claire, you can follow up with more.
Sure. Kia everybody. My name's Claire, for those who don't know me, and I'm from Stats NZ in New Zealand. Lovely to be here. We have done some work around age adjustment of disability statistics. We released a report last year, and it was really, we weren't doing the age adjustment in terms of comparing prevalence rates to other countries, but we were doing some age adjustment on outcomes for disabled versus non-disabled people, to try and take into account the fact. So, for example, in well-being, we see in our data that older people tend to rate their well-being higher, and so we were trying to do some. We did some age adjustments to sort of take out the effects of the age distribution. But what we did was we made the decision on age, whether we did age adjustment based on the data source we used. So we used 3 data sources. One was our census, one was our household labour force survey, so where we get our employment, unemployment rates from, and one was our general social survey. And we actually treated those 3 lots of data differently. For the census, because it was a huge sample, we actually just presented the age, rates for different age groups split. For the household labour force survey, we actually decided not to do age adjustment, but we did a cut at 65. So there's a big difference in labour market statistics between those who are aged 15 to 64, which the survey covers, and those who are 65 and over, because that's where a lot of people decide to move into retirement in New Zealand. And then for the general social survey, we actually did age adjustment because it's a smaller survey, and the changes in those outcomes are more gradual and don't have a obvious cutoff. And so we used age adjustment for that, which was really, really interesting to see what was an impact and what wasn't. But I would be interested if anybody else has any experience or any advice around age adjustment of the disabled versus non-disabled populations, and other examples or recommendations about how we should do that.
I hope some other people will add, but I'll mention that this morning's session, the same topic came up. And someone said that it's important to do that kind of adjustment. And I think it was particularly around some of the labor force, some of the other things that are also very age related. And this was Dan Mont, and he was advocating for doing, I think, exactly what you were doing. And I think that from my point of view, and I think we're not at we want to develop the advice, but it sounds like what you did was extremely reasonable. Someone asked this morning about how anything that might be age adjusted could be misinterpreted. They were worried about policymakers who tend to discount disability in older people because it's an age thing and not a disability thing. And I think the answer there is that you really do have to think about not only, what are you showing? So if you're talking about employment, maybe you just do the cutoff because it makes sense. You also have to worry about your data set. Do you have enough, and we didn't talk about that, do you have enough detail in order to be able to do some of the age specific results? But I think the questions you raise are really critical and would be something really important for the work group to think about and come up with recommendations for. But if others on the on the call today have had experience and advice, I think this would be a great time to share it.
Anyone else want to share some experiences or thoughts, provide some feedback?
I will. Claire, can I ask you to send us your report? Because I think that would be very good to pass on to the work group, which perhaps you might be interested in joining. But if not, we would love to have your report.
Absolutely. I'm actually just in the process of copying the link, and we'll put it in the chat now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for doing that.
No worries.
I think it really is important for us to come to some kind of either an interim solution to this, because it was really stopping work on doing these reports, but it's also something that I think we're all dealing with within our country about how to deal with this, because as Claire said, it's not only comparing to other countries, but you compare groups within your own country, and you kind of have to make these decisions. So I do hope that if you don't want to talk today, that you will volunteer to work on the group, and then when the group does present its results, provide real active feedback on what that is. So it's like one last chance for anybody who wants to say anything. Okay, then I think I'm handing this back over to Julie.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, indeed. Thank you. I will put on my video so you can see me chat with you. Hello, everyone. Again, I am going to moderate the session on the work group updates. And in addition to moderating the session, I'm going to give all of the work group updates. We heard from Margie Schneider this morning, who provided the update for the mental health and psychosocial functioning work group. We heard from Mitch Loeb, who also provided updates on the child functioning and the analysis and dissemination activities. And then we heard from Robert Bulema on the work or progress that the environment and participation group has made thus far. These members are not with us here in this second session. So let me start with the update from the mental health and psychosocial functioning group. As you may recall, at the end of the last meeting in the fall, one of the things that the work group reported out was that a test had been conducted in South Africa, a cognitive test of some of the questions that are being considered as additional psychosocial functioning questions for consideration in the Washington Group tools. And at the conclusion of the fall or the annual meeting, the plan was to go out and now do more cognitive testing. And there are a number of countries who are interested in doing that cognitive testing. But that has not, for the most part, happened yet. And of course, the primary barrier is being able to do the training, which we can't we can't travel, and we're not doing training in person, but also in the countries themselves, being able to conduct those tests in person, as well as having the time, given that COVID is still taking up a lot of their energy. So here's the situation as we stand right now. The work group has one country that is fully committed to cognitive testing and is moving slowly forward, and that is Costa Rica. They're still waiting for responses from other countries. They do have a short list of interested countries, but if the situation has changed in any of the countries that are here present today, and there is interest in joining this effort, we on the mental health work group and Margie and Elena specifically would like to hear from you. So this training that is being planned for Costa Rica is planned for somewhere around October or November of 2021. And what's going to happen between now and then is the development of training materials that can be delivered in a virtual environment. So instead of traveling there and training the interviewers on site, we're developing virtual e-learning tools and setting that up. So hopefully that will go very smoothly, and a cognitive test will start at that time in Costa Rica after that training. What has also happened in parallel is that Margie and Elena have been talking to a group that is a consortium of international NGOs. And the group, their role is to develop mental health and psychosocial support for people in humanitarian crises and ensure inclusion of persons with disability in humanitarian action. And the members of the group, as I mentioned, are largely international organizations and UN agencies. And those discussions with this group are evolving still, but may result in some support, some financial support for the testing of additional psychosocial functioning questions. So this is good news coming from the work group. In terms of next steps, the work group is going to finalize this training, as I mentioned, and run a pilot training in Costa Rica, as well as with some of these organizations who have expressed interest in joining that effort. They're going to conduct the actual cognitive testing in Costa Rica after that. They're going to proceed now that initial talks have concluded with a funding proposal and try to get partner countries to buy into training in their locations as well as part of this funded activity. Now, in parallel to all of this testing and development of additional questions, there's still very much an interest in using what data we all already have in place to inform analyses and to really start taking a look at how the current questions on anxiety and depression are operating in our data collections. And I know Margie and Elena have asked during the Washington group meetings, first, if you could let them know, has your country included, for example, the anxiety and depressions in the extended set or in the short set modified. If those questions have been asked and data have been collected, they would really appreciate knowing that. Secondly, if you are willing to contribute some analyses that may tell us more about how those are going and what the findings are, then they would also like to know that as well. I think that would add significantly to the session for the upcoming annual meeting. So after this session is over, I'll get a chance to put in the chat both Margie and Elena's email address, and you can reach out to them as the work group leaders and they'll let the rest of us on the work group know. But those are the two significant activities that they reported on in the first session. I don't see any hands up. Is there a comment? Oh, Claire is asking if I have any guidance on what sort of analysis in particular would be useful. The analysis that is of interest with these questions, there's broad interest. There isn't one specific question we are trying to answer. We would like to see, what prevalence you get, what proportion of the population, report in what ways. Do you see a distribution across the answer categories that is similar to what is captured, for example, in data sets in other countries? I can tell you that these questions are on the US National Health Interview Survey, and they have been there for almost 10 years now. So it would be very interesting if we could find other countries who had collected data with using these questions, just to start reporting out on what we are seeing. I think a range of analyses would be of interest. Any other questions?
So I was just going to say that we have one survey that's already collected these data, and we've got two more which are in the field at the moment. So at some stage in the future, we may be able to look at some of that data.
That would be wonderful. I will let Margie and Elena know. And we have a number of people in the mental health work group that are very keen to do some analysis with their own data and then collaborate with others. So thank you. Okay, now I'm going to be Mitch for a minute. And I'll start with the analysis work group update. So again, when we ended the annual meeting, there were a couple of key agreements, some of which Jennifer has already mentioned. We agreed to continue to work on the website, and as Jennifer mentioned, we have done so and will continue to do so. The other key agreement was to finalize guidance documents for the analysis of data collected using the Washington Group tools. And there were several types of analysis documents that we were working on. The first document was a document that outlined how it was on severity of disability. So it was, how do you kind of put together the response categories that are collected in the tools and create an overall indicator of disability by, severity. And I'm happy to report that that document has been finalized. It is on the web, as well as translations into the 7 or 6 official UN languages, as well as Portuguese, and I'm forgetting one, Vietnamese. So the severity indicators document is on the web, and the translations of those are also on the web. The second document that was finalized over the winter was a document on developing disability indicators using multiple domains. So not across all domains of functioning, but what if you wanted to pick a smaller set of domains. And there are some examples in that document of how to do that. It has been finalized. It too is on the website, and it is also has been translated, and those translations are available as well. The next set of documents that have been finalized were more, these were the analytic guideline documents. These are documents that were developed in English and available, but we had not created syntax in CS Pro, in SPSS, in SAS, and in Stata. So in all of those programming languages. And those analytic guidelines documents now are in all of those programming languages, and the documents themselves have been translated, and all of that is on the web. So there's been significant progress in getting this analytic guidance out, and it's all available on the web. And I really encourage you to take a look at those and provide any feedback on them, should you wish. The other thing that the analysis work group, of course, is working on is the standard reports. And again, this kind of came up about 2 years ago, but we're still chugging along. The age standardization question will be a big one to resolve, and will inform those reports. And so we are making progress there. What we're not making progress on as much is finding countries who have nationally representative data who are also willing to write up one of these short reports. And again, just to refresh your memory, the majority of the content in those reports is boilerplate language. It doesn't get changed. It describes the Washington Group, it defines disability, it defines the ICF model and how our tools conform to the ICF model. The only difference in the reports is the 3 or 4 charts with data. And once we figure out what we're doing with the standardization piece, then we can move forward. But we would still like to compile a list of countries who would be willing to produce a report. So please do reach out to me or to Mitch if you are in a position at this point to perhaps contribute to that effort. Thank you. The last thing I would mention, I'm looking at Mitch's notes, work continues on the analysis of the child functioning module. Again, the child functioning module was also collected as part of the U.S. National Health Interview Survey, and we do have some analyses going on with that data. I'm very excited that those questions, that the data from those questions are available. They were first collected in 2019. So this is our first look in many cases with this child functioning data. Okay. So now continuing to be Mitch, this is the child functioning work group update. There were 2 key agreements at the conclusion of the meeting on the child functioning work group. The first was to continue work with UNICEF on the development of the inclusive education module. In particular, to carry out additional tests of the module in countries in order to identify populations with out of school children. So the inclusive education module has several sets of sections in them, and for the most part, those sections are comprised of questions that have already been tested, and we know how they perform and they're fine. But there is one section in this inclusive education module, the out of school portion, that has not been extensively cognitively tested, and COVID has definitely had an impact on those plans. So there has been a great deal of interest in the inclusive education module. It is being shared when we are asked. We will share the inclusive education module. We'll typically say that the out of school portion questions have not been finalized, and so there's some caution in that regard. So more on this, and hopefully things will pick up with regard to the cognitive testing of that module. The other thing that the child functioning work group has been spending some time on, not particularly this year because we are halted again because of COVID, but you may recall that in late 2019, interest in a set of child functioning questions to be used in school population or to be administered to teachers in schools and to be incorporated into an education management information system began around 2019. This has resulted in the child functioning module TV, CFM TV for teacher version. That set of questions is simply a subset of the larger child functioning module, and it has also been produced into a document, but testing on how that works with teachers or with school administrators has not occurred yet. So, the focus of that testing won't be in how the questions themselves perform, because that has already been done as part of the larger child functioning module, but the TV version testing for that is largely about testing with teachers themselves. And so because of COVID, again, progress has not been made on that testing, but it has been quite a bit of interest in receiving that set as well. And we do share that set. It's not on the web, it's by request, with the caveat that the testing has not been completed. So, as a final point, Mitch did relay this morning that the interest in both the inclusive education module as well as the child functioning module teacher version has been great. He receives emails, the Washington Group Secretariat receives emails, and we are sharing those, as much as possible. And we look forward to a time when we can get back to testing those fully. So let me stop, and I'm going to switch over to Robert's notes from the Environment and Participation group. Okay. The Environment and Participation group presented some next steps at the last meeting. The next steps are to develop a concept paper for collecting data on environment and participation for persons with disability. They are to identify criteria for the development of the questionnaires for this data collection, present the questionnaire developed to the Washington Group stakeholders for our review and adoption. And then once the questionnaire is approved, of course, the plan is to go out and test those questions. So those are the large goals of the group, and that continues to be the case. The group is still forming a bit. The challenge has been there has been low participation in the countries and the calls for becoming members of the Environment and Participation group, as well as of those who have indicated an interest. So Robert did kindly ask again that those interested in working in this area, please reach out to him, and it is an important area, and we do get a lot of questions about this. So in terms of the way forward for this group, the group is planning to meet in June next month of this year. And the main agenda items will be the formation of subgroups to kind of parse out the work, so that that the burden is a bit easier, as well as assigning each of these subgroups tasks around the overall agenda, and then map out a plan for completing those tasks and accomplishing the different assignments. Those subgroups are largely going to be organized around developing this concept paper or developing methodological guidelines or the survey questionnaires. And he is looking forward to not only having that first meeting, but getting going on some of those activities. The last thing that Robert reported out to the larger group is that he will be leaving public service at the end of May. But as many of you know, Ms. Renee Spund will also, who has been working with Robert during this time, she is going to stay. She's there, staying there at the Bureau, as well as she will be heading the Environment and Participation group. So we do have some overlap and expect that to be an easy transition. And again, when we send out notes from the meeting, we can send her contact information as well. And that concludes the updates. Let me go back to Zoom. Are there any questions or concerns or thought sharing or?
So Julie, there's one, I guess, question in the chat from Hector. And he
Uh-huh.
just wants to know if there's a time frame for people to, if they want to volunteer to carry out one of the data analyses or to join one of the work groups.
There is no time frame. I think as you can see, the work groups that are at very different stages, but they all have robust agendas and things that they would like to do. So if you are interested in even a part of the work group, work plans, please do reach out at any time. I do think that the environment and participation group, would like to hear from you sooner rather than later, and being part of that meeting in June will be important and fruitful. In terms of the analysis of disability data, this is going to be an ongoing activity. But in terms, what I'm thinking is if we had a few volunteers and could pull together something over the next several months, then we may very well have something that, we could share at the annual meeting, 6 months from now. So no specific time frame, Hector. Thank you, Cordell. Anyone else? Okay, I'll hand it over to Heidi.
Thank you very much, Julie. I'm pleased to moderate this session on regional groups on disability statistics. Much like Julie, I will be moderating and also presenting the reports that were given during this morning session. If you are not yet involved in one of these regional groups, I think this will be an interesting opportunity for you to hear a little bit about what's happening in your region. And if you do wish to contribute and become involved, you can engage directly with the chairs of these groups. So the first group that will present, we'll be hearing from our colleague Malefono from the Pacific Group on Disability Statistics. Malefono, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Heidi, and good morning, everyone from Samoa. On behalf of Ms. Malefono, sorry, because she just left for another HM meeting, so she's excusing herself. But on behalf of Malefono and the Pacific Group on Disability Statistics, myself, Saya Opo from the Samoa Bureau of Statistics, I would like to take this opportunity to report on some of the updates from the Pacific Group on Disability Statistics. Well, for the 2021 activities, the Pacific Group Disability Working Group, we had met on the 21st of May to update the working group of our updates as per our term of reference, in which we are responsible in coordinating our member countries for the upcoming surveys and the inclusion of the Washington Group 2. So also in that meeting, we had discussed the proposal for a fund from DFAT to assist with the group activities, because I may recall with the steering committee meeting in March, that we had reported that that's one of the challenges with the group is the area of funding. So with the assistance from the Washington Group Secretariat, we had discussed the proposal for a fund from DFAT. And some of your statistics as the coordinator had met with the Samoa DFAT on behalf of the Pacific Group on Disability Statistics last week. And we had discussed if this can be a bilateral agreement or a regional one. So we are waiting for an update, but the facts are Samoa sounds positive with our fund proposal. So the Pacific Group Disability Statistic Working Group will meet again sometime next week to update them once the DFAT will inform us with the status of our funding proposal. For our next plan, we are in the planning phase of another meeting, virtual meeting with all our members of the Pacific Group Disability Statistics to celebrate our 1-year anniversary in July 17. And in terms of our issue that needs to be discussed for the next annual meeting in September, I think this is one of the areas that we really need to see some of the assistance from the Washington group with if there's a tool or part of the tool for ease of data collection for disability during the time of disasters. So that's one of the areas that we need to discuss for our next meeting. Also, there's always concern from our partners or the users in using the Washington tool. If there are any questions that need to be inserted in terms of the reasons for disabilities. Say, for example, some of the people with a lot of difficulties in seeing, they are caused by, they had given birth with those type of disabilities or because of injuries or those different kind of reasons. So those are some of the areas and updates or reports from the Pacific Group on disability statistics. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Tayopo, for that update. I will now continue to provide the reports that were given this morning by the chairs of the other regional disability statistics groups, starting with the Casablanca group. We heard an intervention by Mr. Rami Al-Dibs. So Mr. Al-Dibs began his presentation by offering a bit of an overview of the objectives of the Casablanca group, which have to do with breaking the language barrier and encouraging the Arabic countries in the Middle East and Northern Africa region to use the Washington Group questions as a main tool for collecting disability data. Another important objective of the group is to develop and improve the production of comparable indicators related to persons with disabilities in the Arab region. In terms of progress that they've had, they've collaborated quite successfully with the regional commission, the UN Regional Commission in that area, ESQA, to organize a series of meetings. They've had a series of meetings over the past 3 years. He also stressed the importance of the creation of an expert group in 2020. And this expert group was established as a subgroup of the Casablanca group to discuss and develop disability statistics in the region. He also noted several publications that have been prepared, stressing 3 in particular. The first is a disability glossary, which contains over 170 terms and definitions relating to disability data and disability statistics in both English and in Arabic, including the Washington Group short set questions and some of the other tools. In terms of other publications, they've also here again collaborated with ESQA to prepare a regional guidebook to improve disability data collection and analysis. And more recently, a publication to analyze 115 disability indicator framework linking the SDGs and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. In terms of future activities, some of the things they're looking to do is to build capacity among statisticians working in the field. They're also very interested in examining disability statistics in the context of crises, thinking in particular about the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, to work with ESQA to build a disability database in the Arab region, thinking forward to the 2021 census round. We next heard from Mr. Steve Mboko, who is the chair of the Brazzaville Group on Disability Statistics. And he noted that there are 25 Francophone countries in Africa with over 300 million people, and the range of persons with disabilities in that area is somewhere between 6 and 11 million people living with a disability. The upcoming activities is that in 2021, they are planning to carry out 2 activities. The first is a meeting of the country members of the Brazzaville group to promote research in health statistics with a focus on disability statistics, thinking particularly of censuses and surveys as sources of information. And the purpose of this meeting would also be to consolidate a link between country members and knowledge. So to create a space for knowledge sharing between the representatives of the national statistical offices of the 25 Francophone African countries. The second activity they're planning is a training workshop on disability statistics. So here the idea would be to train statisticians from the statistical offices on how to collect data on the different types of disabilities using different Washington Group tools, but then also train these statisticians in the analysis and interpretation of the data from the Washington Group tools using statistical programs such as Stata and SPSS. Going forward and thinking of activities beyond 2021, they very much aspire to have an annual meeting once a year to touch base and discuss opportunities, challenges, and share lessons learned. And also to include a module on disability statistics in a demographic statistics training program in the main demographic training institute for the Francophone countries. So they would like to include a disability module in that larger training. And finally, they would like to strengthen the operational capacities of the Brazzaville Group Secretariat. And I should note that, as Jennifer mentioned in her opening remarks, the Brazzaville Group is one of the groups that we anticipate will be receiving some kind of financial support from BMZ in order to carry out some of these activities. This morning, we also heard from our colleague Rajan Silval from the Kathmandu Group. And he really shared a challenge, which is that he has actively been trying to engage with the Washington Group representatives from the countries in his region: Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. And he has received a very tepid response only from Bhutan and Maldives. And so his call was to try to motivate the other countries to become involved in the work of the group. And this was successful in the sense that there were representatives from other countries in the region who engaged him and expressed their interest in participating. So we hope that with that, we can move forward with them. And he also requested that the Washington Group Secretariat also support that effort to have an initial meeting in the coming year. We heard from Nicolas Petreschi from the Statistical and Census Institute of Argentina, and he reported on the progress of the Buenos Aires group. He mentioned or reminded us that it was during the 19th Washington Group annual meeting held in Buenos Aires in 2019 that the idea emerged to have a regional group for Latin America, and that INDEC of Argentina offered to lead the coordination of this group that became known as the Buenos Aires group. During the first part of 2020, they had many video conferences between the technical teams in Argentina and Brazil. IBGE of Brazil is the other co-lead on this group, as well as with the UN Regional Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, also calls with the Washington Group Secretariat and with RIADIS, which is the umbrella organization for organizations of persons with disabilities in Latin America. They also, in an example of South-South collaboration, they had a video conference with the Pacific Group on Disability Statistics to exchange experiences. And we think that this is going to be a very powerful tool going forward, this exchange of information among the regional disability statistics groups. And then Nicolas also noted that just in April, during the 20th meeting of the Statistical Conference of the Americas, which is a subsidiary body of ECLAC that convenes all the national statistical offices of the countries in the region, there was a specific side event on the Buenos Aires group so that the national statistical offices of the region can learn about the existence of this group and hopefully get involved. In terms of the next steps, tomorrow, Thursday, May 27th, the first extended meeting of the Buenos Aires group will take place. They've already received confirmation from 14 out of the 18 countries of the region. And during this meeting, it's expected that the terms of reference of the group will be discussed and agreed upon, as well as the timeline for carrying out the activities of the group. And these main activities, he noted 3. The first is to establish a schedule of virtual meetings to coordinate activities among the countries. The second activity is to establish a more fluid channel of communication to share results and experiences. And the third is to strengthen and develop capacity within the countries of the region, providing training workshops for producers and data users, the collection and analysis and dissemination of data using the Washington Group tools to support South-South cooperation and the sharing of experiences among countries of the region, to standardize tools and analytic methodologies and generate standard products for dissemination, and finally, to participate through the implementation of methodological exercises in the Washington Group's sub-work groups. So that is the news that we have coming out of Buenos Aires. If you are from that region and you have not yet confirmed your participation in tomorrow's meeting, we would encourage you to do so. And finally, we heard from Robert and Joliswa Nvase. Joliswa is from Statistics South Africa, and Robert from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. Their intervention was much more concise because it is the most newly formed group. And so they're really expressing their commitment to leading this group, and at this point also seeking collaboration and participation of other countries. These are the English-speaking countries in Africa that will conform this particular group going forward. And so they're at a stage of reaching out and trying to engage and trying to activate the group. And this is also one of the groups that will be supported by the BMZ funding that will be generously provided by the Ministry of Germany. So that is essentially the information that was delivered this morning. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I don't know, Julie or Cordell, if there's anything in the chat at this point in time.
Not at this time.
Okay, excellent. So in this case, now I will give the floor to Cordell, who will moderate the final session of our meeting this afternoon.
Thank you, Heidi. So now, as Heidi mentioned, we're going to move into the last session of the meeting, which is an open discussion and a discussion of the plan for the fall annual meeting. And Jennifer Maddens is going to lead this session. And here we're just going to talk about just plans for the annual meeting, which include potential topics for the meeting, as well as for the format and things that can be done to encourage interaction among the participants at the meeting. If you guys have any suggestions to offer, we'll also discuss any potential topics for special webinars or special topic meetings that might occur outside of the annual meeting. And then we'll also go into dates for the fall meeting as well. And so we're a little ahead of schedule, so we have plenty of time for discussion. So now I'm going to hand the floor back over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Cordell. And I first want to congratulate the Pacific Group on Disability Statistics for what looks like a successful conversation with DFAT, and that's great. It's really good to hear that that went well. And hopefully we can use this as a model to get some of the other regional groups funded. So if you're from one of the other regions and you know that there's a development office in one country that is particularly interested in your region, we we can kind of use the same approach to maybe some of the others. So please let us know. And as you can see, the groups are at very different stages. They started at different times, and that was expected. And they're also kind of going their own way. The idea was to have the regions, the regional groups address regional problems, and also have appropriate interaction among the groups. That's also one of the other things that we wanted to do. So hopefully when we meet in October, we'll have even more progress on some of these regional activities. Okay, so let's move to the plans for the Washington Group 2021 meeting. If you can give me the next slide. So over the last, I don't know, since the last annual meeting, we've gotten some questions that for what might be done at the next annual meeting, and also some topics that people wanted to have more conversation about. And so we're just going to present those. These are by no means the only things under consideration for the annual meeting. It's completely open what we might do at the annual meeting. And we're really looking for a lot of input into, as Cordell said, not only the topics, but also how the meeting might be organized. And you know, I think the steering committee and the secretariat would very much like to have as much participation from individuals as possible. So don't be shy. If you'd like to be involved in the development of the agenda, please let us know. So one of the issues that comes up all the time are issues around data disaggregation, SDGs, and also issues around data analysis. And as has been reported, some of the major products in the area of data analysis and disaggregation have been finalized and have been posted. So the reports that Julie reported on from the analytic group, those are done. And so there's been a lot of reports done on disaggregation and how to do it and why to do it. And so there's really a lot about this, but it does keep coming up as an area of interest. What we need, though, is a little bit more specificity about exactly what you would like a session to focus on. What do you want to hear about it? And also, who would like to participate in such a session? I think everyone should feel very, very open to taking on a meeting session, organizing it, getting people to participate, just taking it over. That is really would be great if people wanted to do that. But if you don't, then we also need more detail on exactly what you would want to hear about data analysis and what you would want to hear about data disaggregation and SDGs. We got some feedback on that this morning, but we really do need more, because I think, speaking for myself, I'm not exactly sure what would be useful at this point over and above what we've already done. And really, we want to make very good use of your time, because we know everybody is extremely busy right now. So we want the meeting sessions to really speak to what the needs of the members are. We've also gotten a lot of requests for information on a disability survey. And we have not really thought about disability surveys. We've really focused a lot of our work on creating question sets or modules that could be incorporated into other surveys. So that then the short set was the best example of that. You have a census, you put this in the census. You have a survey, you put it in the survey. You want more information, use the extended set. You want information, use children. But they're incorporated into ongoing surveys. And the question now has come, well, we want to do a more in-depth disability survey. What should we do? Putting together all the modules we've worked on gives you like a little mini survey, but certainly not enough. So is trying to create something that would be like a disability survey, whether it's more topical. I mean, it doesn't have to be a set of questions. It could be more guidelines on how to do a disability survey, or topics that should be included, or modules that should be included. Do we want to do that? Do we think that's something the Washington Group should do? Should we just create more modules? For example, the Environment and Participation Group was thinking about doing a set of a module, as you heard, that would be added to the other modules, the labor force module, the inclusive education module, all of those more modules that people can use as the basis for a disability survey. So I don't know if this is of interest to the membership, but I'm just saying we've gotten questions about it. And the answer to the questions that we've been giving out as secretariat is to say, no, we don't have a disability survey. We have these modules. This is how to use them. You could use them as the core of a disability survey, but that's really as far as we go. And then there's, of course, the COVID-19 related disability data collection. We did do a webinar on that this year. Do we want to do more on that? And if we do want to do more on that, what more? Is it more on the data that have been collected, challenges in the data collection, people's experience in overcoming those challenges? All of those things could fall under that rubric. What exactly would the members like to hear? And then what are the other topics that you might find of interest? I'm just going to go through all the questions and then we'll open it up because I want to make sure they all get on the table. The other is we often hear that you would like to have more interactive format, and I think everyone would like that. The question is exactly how to do it. And so would really like some feedback on things we could do during the meeting that would be more interactive. Some folks this morning mentioned some different platforms and different methods they had, different kind of, I guess, software or whatever that we could incorporate. If you know of those, if you've used things like that recently, let us know what they are. The idea of breakout groups comes up all the time, but we weren't exactly sure what the breakout groups would be doing that the whole group wouldn't do. So we really want to have more advice on how to make it more interactive. It's much harder, I think. I've been on a lot of Zoom meetings and a lot of Zoom webinars over the past year, and there's interaction, but there's no real conversation. And how do we do that? So any ideas about that would be really, really helpful. The next question is, should we have a pre-meeting session? When we used to meet in person the day before the meeting, we would have a pre-meeting, which was kind of a welcome to the new members, where we went through kind of the history of the group and why it exists and what it's doing. We didn't do that last year, our first virtual meeting. We could do it. It doesn't even have to be on the same, the day before the annual meeting. It was convenient there because we were all together. It could be the week before, it doesn't matter, but should we do it? Is there interest in doing it? And then there's the length of the meeting. We have been spreading them out over days rather than having, an 8-hour, 2 full day meetings the way we used to. But, assuming you still do want to have not a full day of a virtual meeting, how many hours would you like and how many days should it go over? 2 days, 3 days? Somebody mentioned 4 days this morning. So kind of the total amount of hours and how you would like it spread out. And that kind of brings me to this idea of this, two-prong approach we've been using because of the time zone issue. So obviously the morning meeting had a lot more people, and we never meet all together just because the way things kind of work out. Is this the best way to do it? There's no magic that there's no time that is reasonable. It's not even good. It's reasonable for everyone. But is it better to kind of take turns staying up at night to go to a meeting than the way we've approached it? So we'd really like feedback on that. We thought maybe we should start with this meeting, the afternoon meeting next time, and maybe we'd have more people come to that first one. So this would be the main meeting. We could try that, but I think we'd like some more input on what do you guys think about having this two-prong approach? Do you feel like it increases your ability to participate, or it's really not what you want it to be? We've picked out some dates that are possible dates for the next meeting, and this would be for 3 days, either October 18th or 20th or November 8th to 10th. if these don't work, there are other possibilities. There may be something going on that we're not involved in, that we don't know about, and we certainly can modify these dates, but it's just something to put forward. And I think on the next slide, Cordell, which I actually forgot about this morning, I think there's one more, and it is about, do we want to have other topics for webinars or other things in between the meetings? And those would be like more focused, like the COVID one, or we could have done the age adjustment the same way. We don't have to have it as part of the meeting, but we probably get, well, it probably doesn't matter anymore what kind of, whether we do it as part of the meeting or separate in terms of attendance. But we, again, need topics. We need things that people want to hear about. This is over and above the updates. We think we will probably always have the updates because we want everyone to know what other people are doing, is in case they want to be involved, or just to know you're a member of the group. This is what the group is doing. There may be a product out of that group at some point, but we really also want other topics. So I don't know, Cordell, maybe go back to the other slide because it's got more on it. So I'm just going to open this up. What we are going to do is we generally do some kind of summary of the meeting, afterwards send it back to all attendees, and we'll do that again. We'll also kind of outline some of these questions and ask for feedback. I told the group this morning, and I will tell it to you too, there's nothing more demoralizing when we send an email out and say, tell us what you think, and nobody answers, because we really feel like people are not interested, or we've done something to offend you. I mean, the secretary really would like to get feedback. So when we send that out, please, you don't have to answer every question. You don't have to have an opinion on everything, but please send something back. We really do want to hear from you. And we kind of feel very alone when nobody answers. So, it'll be a really a request to come back and provide some feedback, because we really do want these meetings to be meaningful for the members, and we feel like we don't always know what that would be, and we really want more input and more participation. Again, if organize one of the sessions, organize a webinar, the Secretariat is happy to provide whatever support we can to make that happen, but we would like the ideas to come from the members to the extent possible. So I'm going to open it up, and it's a small number, so the chat is fine, but or just raise your hand or just unmute yourself and talk, because I think we can really handle it any way you would like.
There is a comment in the chat from Claire, and Claire, you can definitely open your mic and add to it, speak out loud. But it says that we would be really interested in having a conversation about how to identify people with learning, cognitive disabilities, and neurodiversity that might be missed with the Washington questions. And Claire, you can elaborate if you would like.
Yes, so I guess I'm really interested to hear the conversations about a disability surveys. One of the things that my team are working on at the moment is the development of the next New Zealand Disability Survey, which will run in 2023, and looking at the screening methodology we might use and looking at updating that from last time. And one of the things we're coming up against, we're looking at the longer set of Washington Group questions as a possibility to help with our screening, but aware and have received feedback from parts of the community that said that learning disabilities might not be adequately picked up in that. And I guess it's something we're struggling with at the moment, is how do we actually adequately identify those people within the survey. And so we would be really keen to speak to others and to find out more about how other people are approaching that, and if there's a Washington Group aligned method that we might be able to use to do that.
I think that's a really interesting topic, and one that, there isn't one right now. And I think it has been one that we know is missing, as the psychosocial was also missing. So that definitely can be on the list. And we can ask of others when we send out this note, whether anyone has been working on this. I don't know, Julie, did you want to say something about the work you've been doing?
Well,
on the spot.
no, that's fine. I read your comment in the chat, Claire, one of the first things that came to mind was, wouldn't it be great to look at the US, in the US survey, we have the child functioning module, which of course includes questions on cognition as well as learning. But the survey has additional questions, some of them, nothing that would capture the full range of learning or cognitive or neurodiverse conditions that you might be interested in, but it would be great to take a look at that survey questionnaire and identify other questions and say, okay, well, here is the group that the child functioning module identifies. And here is
Venga a traducir lo que es porque no entiendo nada.
And here is how those other questions, play out in that same group. So this is exactly what, one of those kinds of analyses where, countries who are interested and have the data could do something like that. But my guess is that in a disability survey where there is additional room, and if that is a priority, then additional questions will have to be added.
Yeah, we're definitely looking at the possibility of adding some additional questions to capture that. It's just trying to work out what those additional questions are in a way that sort of fits thematically within the way the Washington Group questions work, I suppose, and conceptually in the same sort of style of question.
That's an even harder task, because many of these additional questions don't take this kind of functional approach. They ask straight away, does this child have fill in the blank kind of condition? In order to capture that information, those kinds of questions have not been developed.
Yeah.
On our adult survey, we did add an age of onset question to better identify individuals who have either intellectual or developmental disability, and the age of onset aligns with some of our programmatic definitions of intellectual and developmental disability. So if something started before age 18 or 22, that's part of the definition.
Yeah, and I think we have sort of questions that are similar to that in our previous disability survey. So that's something that we would be collecting. And we do have questions that we used in a previous survey, but they were very much asking about specific conditions. And we're sort of trying to move away from that a little bit. So it's more from a point of view.
Maybe that nobody has the answer, but it sounds like something that would be a good thing to discuss and try to see what people have been doing, if anything. So we could put that on the list and ask about it.
Yeah, we may well have made some progress ourselves by that stage as well.
That would be great. Then you can tell us how to do it. That's even better.
We do get quite a few inquiries now about larger disability surveys. So I think the more that we can learn about what has been used or is getting ready to be used, and the better position we are in to determine, well, what work can we do to help, what needs to be done, and what can we learn from others. So Claire, if you would be willing to share those questionnaires, the one that was used previously, as well as maybe the one that you're developing when you can, that would be great.
Yeah, we're probably a reasonable way off having anything that we're able to share of what we're currently developing, because we're still fairly early in that process, but certainly we'll be happy to when we do. But I will find links and stuff to previous ones. We're just in the process of getting them all some of our previous disability surveys put in an accessible place online. So I will pass on the links to that once they're somewhere easy to access.
Thank you.
That would be great. But that is a good it's a good topic, and it is a whole that would be nice to fill and fill in a way that everyone could do it the same way. Great. Any other ideas for possible agenda items and or topics that we might have, if not for the annual meeting, but for a special webinar? This sounds like it could be either one. It can be something for the annual meeting, or it could be a special webinar. And if we know others in our countries that are working on similar things, we certainly can ask for guest speakers. We've done that as well in the past. What is your feeling about this 2-session approach we've used the last couple times, where we kind of repeat the meeting when it's at a more reasonable time for folks in your region? Does this work for you, or do you find it's not as useful? This is when I'm feeling lonely again. It's okay to say it's not working. We really want to know that. And if it is working, if having a smaller group meeting is fine, then we'd like to know that too.
I'm interested to know what the attendance was like at the other session in terms of the numbers of people.
I think Cordell told me that there were the high of the count was 96, but we think there were over 100 people who were on at one point or another.
Yeah, I guess that's it comes down to that a little bit, in that obviously for New Zealand this time is much easier than in the middle of the night, but on the other hand, this is obviously a much quieter session, so it may then mean that we don't quite get the same richness of conversation that you might have had in the bigger session.
I think we might. So I guess the thing would be, you'd rather do this than have to get up in the middle of the night. Maybe that's what it comes down to. I would. I mean, if I were you, I don't do 3 o'clock in the morning so well anymore. But you know, maybe if we did this one first, we might get more of the Americas to do the first one rather than the second one. So we might try to get more people to come to this one rather than have everyone, because there's a lot of time zones that work if we do it in the morning. So we could try that to try to even it out a little bit more. I think I saw Mexico can do either one. Maybe we need to encourage all of Latin America to do either one, because they can. I mean, we can do either one as well. It's Europe and Africa that's the problem. But we'll think about it, and we'll see what we might be able to do to kind of even it out a little bit more, and maybe try some different approaches, although at the moment I don't know what they are. We'll think about it. In terms of kind of length of meeting, or you prefer a 2 or 3 day? Is 3 hours good per day, or do you think we should go longer, maybe 4 hours? Should we go back to 2 hours? Do you have any feeling for what that might be?
My personal preference would be to have longer slots and fewer days, because it's easier to schedule in, as long as there's enough time for a bit of a break. If it's going to be like a 4-hour session, as long as there's time for a bit of a break to get a cup of tea, etc.
Yeah, we didn't do it for this one because we felt, well, 2.5 hours we could manage.
Yeah,
but yeah, if it had gone any further, you're right, we would have. Okay, well, that's very helpful. I mean, I think that you know, I think people may not 4 hours. We've got another good one for 4 hours. No one is going to, there's not going to get a complete agreement here, but we'd like to please the most people as we can. So that's you'll hear again from us when we send this thing out for comment, but it's good to get some feedback now in terms of what you would like to see. And again, how to make it more interactive. You know, one idea was that we would, if we had a particular topic, that we would do it in breakout rooms, have different presenters, and then come back together. But, you know, we could have done that with the age adjustment, but even this small group, we didn't get a lot of conversation. And I don't know whether that's just people tend to be quieter on these Zoom meetings, or the topic was not of particular interest, or I messed up giving it. So we don't know why we're not getting more interaction. So any feedback on that, if you don't want to say that in public, that's fine too, but you can just let us know. Because we think it would be good to, we'd like to hear your voices, see your faces. So I think that unless, and anyone who wants to say anything, please say it now. But I think we're pretty much at the end of the formal presentations that we were planning on and updates. So we can close the meeting early unless anybody has a comment, question, wants to say anything, where the floor is open. Just talk.
I just wanted to say thank you for a really informative meeting. Really enjoyed the presentations and learning a lot more.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for attending. We probably won't see you in person for a bit, but hopefully by maybe less than a year from now, we will. But we're hoping to see you a little bit more often on these virtual meetings than we have in the past. So that's why we need your ideas about what you'd like to interact on. And we're willing to actually try anything that works. So whatever would meet the needs of the members is what the Secretariat and the Steering Committee want to do. So I hope everybody has a good day, evening, wherever you are, whatever time of day it is. And you'll be hearing from us, maybe not next week. It takes us a while to kind of recoup from these meetings. The scariest thing for us is running the Zoom, because we are not meeting organizer here. That was one of the nice things we could do with the DFAD funding. But we will get back to you with the slides, although they'll all be posted on the website as normal, and some set of questions that we hope to get feedback on for planning for the next 6 months. So anyway, everyone stay well. That's the most important thing. And good luck with all of your activities, and good luck to Samoa, to all your get with the DFAD folks and let us know how that works, because we're going to have a party as soon as you get your funding. Goodbye, everybody. Take care.